Welcome to the Political Risk Podcast, where insurance and geopolitics meet. I'm your host, David Benyon. My guest for this episode is Bruce Carman, Chief Executive Officer of Hive Underwriters. This is Bruce's second appearance on the podcast, so it's a pleasure to welcome him back for this, our 50th episode. It's a very wide-ranging conversation, and you can't get anything more wide-ranging than space, which is where we start, as that's Hive's latest launch. We trace Hive's story thus far, from its origins as an aviation war managing general agent, MGA, developing into a multi-class, multi-channel specialty agency. We also go into some detail about the data analytics side of things that underpins Hive's knowledge-led underwriting approach. Almost inevitably, for an aviation war MGA and for a podcast about geopolitical risk and insurance, we discuss the next steps and ramifications of the English High Court's ruling in June 2025 that the losses incurred by lessors after the aircraft seized by Russia following the invasion of Ukraine are to be covered under their aviation hull war policies. So it's a wide-ranging chat with a well-known and respected figure in the market and a firm favourite of the podcast. Enjoy the episode. Welcome back to the pod.
Thank you, David.
It's lovely having you back.
Nice to be here.
So let's start with a bit of recent news from Hive. So you're going into space, Bruce.
We are. The final frontier.
Yeah. So what details can you share at this point?
So we've announced we're coming to space. We have Jack Keneally joining us. And Jack is a class act. He's somebody who's been working as a space underwriter at Ockham for 7-8 years now. And he's got a proven track record in what has been a very turbulent market in recent years.
So is there anything further than the press release in terms of the products, any detail about that, or if you can give any details about the capacity you're deploying?
So the obvious cover is for launch and the life thereafter of the satellite in orbit. However, clarity in this fast evolving sector, which is the shift away from state-sponsored missions to more commercial sponsored missions now, some of which, or in fact, most of which I think I'm right in saying don't actually insure. So, there's been a shift away from insurance for those as well, the likes of SpaceX. But there's a constant focus on the requirement for new insurance products, and examples would include debris liability, servicing of missions out there in orbit, and the advent of space tourism, obviously giving rise to PA for astronauts.
Yeah, wow. That's a brave new world, isn't it?
It really is. Capacity gravitates to the better underwriters. And, with that in mind, we have one of the market's leading underwriters in Jack, who's joining us here at Hive. I'm confident we'll be able to get great, excellent support from carriers who either know Jack or will get to know Jack through us. So we'll have a panel of support for his excellent ability.
So when are you hoping to actually start underwriting?
Jack joins in November. I think the 1st of November he joins us, and we'll probably start underwriting in the new year.
So what do you like about a space business? Why do it? And what's the state of the market?
Here at Hive, we like underwriters, we like teams, we like people who are going to outperform. And as I've already said, I think are best in their class or perceived to be best in their class by us. So you can look at the cycle, you can look at the trend. And I've said previously, there's no right or wrong time to join a class. There's just the right team. And with the right team, and when I talk about underwriters who outperform, how do you outperform in what is such a competitive marketplace? And I think it's having the right tools. Well, firstly, given empowerment. Not every underwriting entity gives you empowerment and the belief to believe in yourself to underwrite for the capacity that's behind you. So we have underwriters that we believe aren't going to underwrite for the top line for income and be forced to do that. They're going to underwrite for profitability and for that bottom line. So I think it's quite important that you get underwriters who are going to say no and not be afraid to say no and walk away from business when it's underpriced. And that's really part of the problem that we have in our marketplace, is that there are a whole bunch of underwriters out there who are forced to write for top line, or all they've ever done is underwrite for top line, and they become a market tracker. So definitely being the opposite to that and being selective and being able to walk away, I think, when the terms and conditions aren't in your favor, I think is key. And that is what we look for in teams and individuals.
So I assume between the lines of what you're just saying that it is quite soft and competitive.
When is anyone's class in the sector or the specialty sector not competitive, I would say. We do see these vacuums and voids when there have been some catastrophic years and capacity walks away. And certainly we've seen that from space where it's had some large losses in recent years, and we have seen capacity go. I would say there's still plenty capacity to be deployed out there, notwithstanding the reductions in capacity. But there is better discipline, certainly, that we're witnessing in that marketplace, which is encouraging, and rates are certainly moving upwards.
And you mentioned about some of the expansion of the commercial space industry. Obviously, we all know SpaceX, but saying that some of that is self-insured. How much is the market growing?
There are two main factors in the growth, and that's the new large launch vehicles and the growing commercialization, moving away from as we just mentioned, the state-sponsored missions. So the market's evolving. And going forward, it's not going to be wholly reliant on the geostationary communications as the only source of income. I think that's going to be key. So I think the world's your lobster. There's going to be a fair bit of growth in the sector yet to come.
So obviously, this is a podcast that's primarily about geopolitics. And we could make a case for space being geopolitics. It's probably on the periphery of it, unless we're talking about Star Wars.
Done that.
Which you've done, on another great podcast. Yeah. Yeah, love that episode you did on the insurance of the Death Star, right?
Yeah, well remembered.
But your evolution as a business really does go into more geopolitically exposed lines. So for those who don't know Hive's business, could you just give us a bit of a potted history?
Sure. Well, my background was war risks, actually. I mean, I started in marine war, actually, before aviation war. And I think it's fair to say that the company I landed at in 1987, just to date me, was M.E. Denby and Others, part of the Atrium Agency, a name that's still alive today, and Syndicate 609 still doing well. Atrium was set up by Mark Denby and Christine Dandridge and Daniel Burnett at the time, back in 1982, 83, I think it was. And all three of them were employed prior to that by a gentleman called Ian Posgate, who had a bit of a reputation as a bit of a megalomaniac for war risks back in the day. Ian Posgate was otherwise known as Goldfinger, actually, and mainly because of his war and terror of the marketplace. But no,
right.
he did a good job of, I think, corralling most of the war risks under one stamp, and that was his. So Mark, Christine, I think it's fair to say, learnt war risks, and it was ingrained in their DNA. And so too was it in mine when I then started working at M.E. Denby and Others. And my interest for aviation war was only fueled mainly out of the Kuwait invasion by Saddam Hussein in August 1990. And thereafter, the rates went stratospheric. And I was quite interested in not just the aviation piece of it, the war risks element. And we were a leader at that time. Fast forward to the mid-90s to late 90s, and Christine and I started using, I think it's fair to say, intel that was maybe trying to find an angle on what was happening around the world in places such as small despotic-run countries in Africa. And our best way of doing so, we found, was via the private military contractors, some of the PMCs, the likes of Executive Outcomes, Simon Mann, who recently passed away maybe 1 month or two ago. And these people, we used to pay for intelligence services to tell us what was happening or what the threats were to the assets on the ground in some far-flung places in the continent of Africa mainly, and sometimes Latin America as well. That then, if you fast forward to 2001 and the tragic incidents we witnessed in New York with 9/11 and the WTC, we then met with a gentleman called Simon Soul, who had majored in Islamic fundamentalism and was working at Whitehall. And Simon was interested in moving into the private sector and said, would we be interested if he set up what became Exclusive Analysis? We did support Simon. He, in fact, supported us for many years and still does to this day. Simon sold some years later successfully to IHS, and IHS more recently have sold to Standard & Poor's, and they are a market leader. But we were the first at that time, proud to say, who helped Simon set up. And so that's just speaking to the DNA of Hive and prior to Hive Atrium as to how we wanted to get as many data sources and intel and knowledge on threat and how that looks. And that's how we are today at Hive, is we probably have a half a dozen data sources for intel on threat assessment.
And just give a brief kind of lines of business list from then to now.
Absolutely. So Hive started in 2017 with aviation hull war. We moved into the war liabilities for third-party aviation. We then, in 2020, moved into airline all risks. In 2023, we then expanded into general aviation all risks. And at this moment in time, we have some 14 binding authorities, each doing a subclass or something niche within those different sectors. So we, I think at this moment in time, have a premium income estimate for this year of $130 million and a staff count of 16.
So last time you were on the pod, I think I called the episode knowledge-led underwriting, because I think that's the phrase that you like to use. So is that the strategy? What are the guiding principles behind your leadership of the business from foundation to today? And you clearly broadened out the product suite in that time. So do you see yourself as an opportunist or someone who thinks in the long term?
Really good question. So I think a lot of people have focused and looked at the MGA sector, and, it's very en vogue, isn't it? But Lloyd's syndicates were always en vogue at a time going back 2 decades ago when people could set up Lloyd's syndicates. It's not in the domain of many to be able to do that nowadays. So yes, MGAs are very en vogue. I'm a long-term strategist. I'm not a short-termist. And the culture we have here is one of empowering. I've already mentioned that, but empowering individuals, but also aligning them. And each of the staff, I'm proud to say that each of the staff are equity partners in this venture. So it needs to work for everybody, different people at different age groups. But if everybody's an equity partner, then they're doing so for the common good. And that's how we are here at Hive. So it's been built with incredibly solid foundations of corporate governance together with state-of-the-art systems and technology that creates the efficiencies and outperformances. So each time we have a question mark about what class we might go into, we have to identify the best in class. We have to identify people who have already maybe got supporting capacity for their venture. And that's almost your dragon's den moment that's occurred before, because a Lloyd's syndicate or a carrier company market carrier has looked at that entity to say, are they fit for purpose for us to delegate our capacity to that individual? So our challenge now, I think, is to build this out from not just aviation, but into, obviously, space is aerospace, and yes, closely aligned with what we're doing. But we have ongoing conversations in multi-channel classes, marine, energy, terror, and multiple other classes. So I think to become a multi-class agency for specialty insurance, but be the agency of choice, because people can come and have not just a good earnings pattern and a good living and a good lifestyle, but empowerment to be their own boss and to grow and to be an equity shareholder, as I've already said, equity partner.
You've already mentioned some aspects of the technology, which is part of that knowledge-based approach. So analytics in particular, what does that mean in the in-house tech that you've developed, or have you also bought some stuff off the shelf? Last time I think we talked at length about this, and it was you much prefer the in-house.
This is a tried and tested trick, actually, because, when I'm in with a client or I'm talking to somebody like yourself, David, my challenge is to just dig into the system and see if the system can literally pop up. And this is where the staff might get nervous, depending on whether someone's developing something at the moment in time. But
should I just say, for the benefit of the recording, Bruce has got his laptop out and is showing me a map of Hive Sentinel.
So that's Hive Sentinel, literally just logged in, and you can see red on the map there are the aircraft we insure in our portfolio, and yellow on the map we don't. So you can see there's a fair bit of risk selection. There's a natural risk selection here up in Russia with the yellow, but you can see what we're on and what we're not on. We can click on any one of those aircraft. We can see the value. There's one Mid-Atlantic. Let's click on that. We can see from literally just clicking on that asset there, that aircraft is between London and New York. It's valued at $11.6 million, And we can then see the full aircraft details. Hive shares 15.2% of this.
And that data was updated 2 minutes ago.
2 minutes ago. And then we can see the risk scores. It's actually mid-Atlantic, so there's no issue there. But were that flying at low altitude over a conflict zone, it would be showing red. And if I was to pick certain of these assets down here on the continent of Africa, you can see that it's going to have a different risk score here. So you can see that very exactly. So Niger, Chad, Libya, Egypt, etc. And you can see that obviously there's a different risk score. So just a quick insight there. And you know, we can drill down into any one airport and see what's on the ground at the airports, any one moment in time up to the minute. So the threat assessment to the airport, the values on the ground at the airport. So this is just an insight, a very quick insight into the data that we're now getting, that we can now mine to see values, threat assessment, altitude, accumulations. All of that is what every underwriter really.
But nobody was quite able to do all those things for you off the shelf.
Absolutely not. No. So we have developed our own system. I think there's a number of people in what is now looking like a gold rush in order to try and get to this, that, you know, this is still in development because there are still things that we want passenger load factors. You start talking about war liabilities. So we want to start to assess that as well. So I think there's multiple tricks and things and development requests that we have for the system, which we're constantly challenging the developers with at the moment.
And would you ever offer it outside the firm?
Well, I think people have asked, and I'm not against it. What I am against is being a call centre. I'm not that SaaS platform call centre. So I want to stick to the day job, which is using it for underwriting. And at the moment, our clients, being the airlines, love it. They really are interested in what their exposures are because they don't know the values so much as we do. And then obviously the carriers that we are underwriting on behalf of, we are giving them intel on a basis that I don't believe anyone else in the market can. So, you know, that is the kind of technology and analytics that I think we as an MGA need to differentiate from the big carriers out there who can't develop things like this overnight. One of the bigger budget teams is always going to get the procurement budget. And here at Hive, we're basically saying, what can change the mood music here? And that's something that I've been trying to develop for the past decade and have only managed to do so in the time whilst we've been here. So our job is to not stop there, but develop whatever technology is going to assist our underwriters. So you can see that these planes are moving on average at 500 miles an hour. If we were to do this with the marine market, for instance, those vessels on the high seas are moving a whole lot slower. So it's very easy to suggest how, I mean, obviously it's not ADS-B transponder data, but in the marine world with Raptors and or other transponders, we know that we can position assets very easily in the marine market onto our map and create a marine version of this.
I'm aware of quite a few things that look quite similar to this in the marine world. What about space, though?
The final frontier, yes, a little bit harder to do, I'd suggest. I think the job there is the intel and analytics is really coming from a third-party consultant with whom we are going to contract. And I think that's the key here, is quite a lot of space underwriters have access to a third-party rocket scientist who's going to help assess the viability of a mission and or launch. And that's exactly how the start point is for us. So ensuring that we have the right consultants with the right intel background who can give us the right steer and help our underwriters. So the other data analytics pieces that we have. So we've also created our own underwriting platform, which is class agnostic. So literally a few tweaks there. And, you know, we can click in other classes, some of which I've already mentioned. So that's quite key. And that's our proprietary system. So we're proud of that too. But also the Hive Mind, which is the data warehouse we've created as well. So there's 3 proprietary systems that we built out here at Hive in order to help create the architecture for multi-class, multi-channel specialty agency. And the Hive Mind, which, by the way, stands for Management, Information and Data, is our data warehouse where we plan to mine all the data. That's obviously got our loss ratios, our triangulations, but also going forward that will have very shortly Sentinel's data in there so that we can mine that data and potentially use AI going forward to point our underwriters and analysts into the right regions.
Wow, that's exciting stuff. Well, turning to the aviation war part of your business, I've read that you've added fresh capacity from 4 Lloyd syndicates. So that's including Hiscox, Probitas, MCI, and Sakun, with lines of business of 200 million for aviation war liability and another 100 million for hull war.
We've actually got 11 Lloyd syndicates and 2 company markets there.
Right, okay.
I think you might have seen the reference to some new syndicates that joined us at 1/1 this year. 4 new syndicates they were, but they were adding to a panel of 7 already. So we've got 11 Lloyd syndicates supporting us, and I think that makes us one of the larger players, certainly from a cross-package perspective, war risks, third-party war liabilities, and then add in the all risks to that. We're bringing a lot of capacity across the 3 different main heads of cover there for the airline clients and the lessors, and even some of the products and manufacturers and airports. So yes, it's a lot of capacity, and with that, we have to use it cautiously.
So for the lessor lawsuit situation, back in December 2024, you told the insurer you predicted at least a $5 billion aviation insurance loss from the Russia-Ukraine aircraft lessor claims. So following that court decision in June, is that estimate still valid? And can you give an update on the current situation and what we expect to happen next in broad terms?
I think it's fair to say as a start point that we were hugely disappointed with the judgment that came out and the ruling that is now in appeal. So on the question of quantum, the number that I gave was on the basis and belief that that wouldn't be a war risk judgment. That is still in appeal. So there is still a big question mark as to what the ultimate number might be. Obviously, there's a lot of numbers out there being bandied around and not a lot of people too willing to put it in the press or make a statement on it. Maybe I was a bit bold in going out there early, but you have to have belief in the system, and notwithstanding the case coming down, as I said, the wrong side, as I said, we are appealing that. And so maybe we'll have to do this again, David, once the appeal has hopefully been successful, because we do believe that there were some things that genuinely need questioning in that judgment. Listen, at the end of the day, I think what this has highlighted is that there are all shades of grey in the policies that were written, issued and purchased, and that going forward, I think the market really needs to have a look at that and make sure that there is no grey going forward. Well, no grey is always tricky, because a good judge and a good barrister will always find some grey, especially when there's a lot of money outstanding. But I do think we have to look at this and say, what are the lessons learned, and make sure that the market moving forward ensures that policies become more watertight and less grey.
Well, we've talked about it before, but the amount at stake here is dramatic compared to the premium volume that you can bring in any given year. It's vast. But 5 minutes ago, you said it yourself, you've got fresh capacity from new Lloyd syndicates coming in. So my kind of prejudice would be that the uncertainty would stop capacity coming in.
I think one thing that has occurred, certainly on our watch, is that we have ensured that policies going forward have sub-limits for confiscation. That, as a black swan, I was talking to one of our carriers the other day and said, we suffered a black swan, and he corrected me and said, no, Bruce, it wasn't a black swan, it was the black swan. I thought that was quite kind of him, but as an event, to say it was a black swan, I don't think is unfair. And to say, could it occur again? Yes, obviously there's some obvious examples such as China, Taiwan that come into sharp focus. Well, we've reduced our exposure to that region by some 90% subsequently, and the sub-limits that have been imposed to the policies, I think, make and address those issues that would have been an issue. Plus, you had this nuance in Russia, the fact that the aircraft were either Irish and or Bermudan registered as opposed to being Russian registered, which isn't the case in China, where they tend to be B registered, being the Chinese register. So I think there are a number of different factors which become very specific to that case, which made it the worst case scenario possible, and one which hadn't really been scaled, scoped and or estimated in people's realistic disasters. Going forward, I think we hopefully as a marketplace have learnt our lesson and addressed that. So that's why capacity is now more interested in A, the new policies, and B, the new rates on offer.
If the appeal isn't successful, is that loss basically already accounted for?
So our capacity are the ones that will reserve, and they're the ones that individually, each and every one of them will make a decision as to how much to reserve for this, whether it's in full or whether they feel they have a really good case on the appeal and therefore it's not in full. And I think, each and every one of them will be different. Hive has no part in that process. We are merely an intermediary in that. So each and every one of them will have their own reinsurance policies as well. Some of them will be group policies, some will be specific, and a combination of the two. And I think, again, so many wide varieties of variables here that no two situations or circumstances are the same. So I think, again, we have to wait and see. I think the fallout, if there is a fallout from the market, reinsurers haven't yet been asked for the check to be cut from the insurers, so that has yet to happen. However, I think prudence would suggest that those that have exposure to the war risks will have already put that down as a number, expectant of the loss from the carriers. And so, yes, I think that money circle has yet to start going around, but I think it's been accounted for in the main, and certainly the market has reacted to the increases that has been seen in the sector.
You mentioned the reinsurers, but more broadly in specialty business, all of which buys reinsurance. Thinking back to one of my favourite movies, Margin Call, when Jeremy Irons, CEO, in a crisis meeting, asks at the boardroom table, where is this going to hit us? And obviously the same reinsurers and the same specialty carriers at primary insurance level doing all sorts of lines of business, a lot of which have geopolitical exposure, everything from cargo to aviation war to political risk or political violence, and the same reinsurers reinsuring them. So I'm just curious how you'd say that the kind of wider fallout may manifest itself.
So a really interesting question. I think, is that a $10 billion question, David, you've asked? But that's, I guess, the key to this. And 10 billion by comparison to the California wildfires is merely a drop in the ocean, right? So, the specialty sector's got bigger ticket problems and or issues that are being addressed out there. But firstly, how many people in the market that have a proportion of the loss, and that's becoming more known and more publicized. I think, people have put out quite a bit of press on that in recent months. Some of them don't buy reinsurance. So that's a net line to their investors. Now, that's a bigger loss, I would suggest, than maybe someone like Hive, who has a multiple number of carriers within the consortium, most of whom I believe have got good reinsurance to cover them. So this thing is diversified and spread. We are incredibly well spread, and so we're incredibly strong as a result of that. So how is it going to affect the market? Yeah, I think it's fair to say that we've seen increases in rates. I think it's fair to say, very hard to predict, but like all of these things, and people say to me, oh, there's trouble on the horizon, Israel and Lebanon and da-da-da. And, what is the spot market doing? And the answer is nothing if the capacity hasn't changed. If the capacity hasn't changed, the rates don't change. The rates are a factor of competition. And, there is too much competition because the capacity hasn't reduced, then the rates aren't changing. So it isn't a spot market as everyone would expect it to be, where we're trading war risks on the basis of what's happening today. It is very sad to say reactive, not proactive. And I think that's the bit that people struggle to get their head around. So when was or has been or when will be the reaction to something like Russia? And I think the answer is, to that question, the capacity in the reinsurance arena hasn't yet gone. And until such time as it does go, you're not going to see the rates change.
I wanted to end on really asking you whether you see a lot of opportunity coming from all this as well.
Well, I think the opportunity is the cross-class opportunity. I've already mentioned the package dynamic that we have on aviation, where we've now got, and my order is a little bit different to most people's order because it starts with hull war, being my specialist kind of knowledge thing of 3 and a bit decades. Then we've got the excess third-party war liabilities for when planes go into buildings and might cause damage, obviously on the back of 9/11. And then we've got the airline all risks, being the hull and the liabilities. Now, that's exactly the wrong way around for most people who'd lead with the all risks. Well, the all risks is a market that's in a bit of a state of flux because the losses are way in excess of the premiums, and yet the rates aren't going up enough. So I think it takes a very cool head by way of a team to walk through that. And that's like a minefield that you're walking through to make sure that you underwrite profitably. And we've done so in that time. So we're very proud of that. But I guess the package, and just coming back to that, the war risks, the third-party war risks, liabilities, and the all risks together, we can basically, I'm not going to say leverage, but offer coverage across those three heads of different classes. And, that's a conversation and a negotiation both with the broker and with their client. So we'd like to think we're offering continuity of service and capacity over a long period and not a dine and dash. That we can also, I'm sure, bring to the party with the likes of political violence, political risks, and terrorism, etc., and other marine war risks potentially. And yes, our challenge now is to grow our capabilities into those sectors and utilize some of the technology and intel and analytics that you've just witnessed and bring that to the fore in those other classes, such that Hive diversifies into the specialty sector. And it's a package play for clients who might have vessels, they might have aircraft, they might have property on shore. And so the big multinationals, we want to be their choice of insurer. We want to bring the capacity to those, and we want to bring knowledge and intel to it.
You keep mentioning marine war as well, whether that's something... You don't already do marine war.
We don't do marine war currently.
But the way you're talking about it suggests that it's next.
Watch this space.
Okay. That's about all for another episode of the Political Risk Podcast. I hope you found our conversation as interesting as I did. Thanks for listening. I've been your host, David Benyon, and I'd like to thank my wonderful guest for this episode, Bruce Carman, CEO of Hive Underwriters. Production was by Peter McGill, and my cousin Lawrence Durkin made the music.